The gunshot echoes across the canyon like thunder, and Jack Malone's blood mingles with the red dust beneath his horse as he stares down at the unconscious girl in the ravine below. Her pale blue dress stands out against the rocks like a wild flower in winter, and the Apache war paint on the dead brave beside her tells him everything he needs to know about how close death came to claiming her. Smoke rises from the direction of Copper Ridge, and he knows Sheriff Morrison's posse is probably burning half the territory looking for him right now. But this girl, this fragile, broken thing sprawled among the stones, changes everything. The choice crystallizes in his mind with brutal clarity: ride hard for the Mexican border and the freedom he's spent 3 years fighting for, or climb down into that ravine and seal his own fate by saving the one person whose father would see him hang without hesitation. Jack Malone measures 32 years by the scars on his hands and the weight of regret in his chest. His face carries the weathered look of a man who's slept under stars more often than roofs, with sun-carved lines around gray eyes that have seen too much and forgiven too little. The black stubble on his jaw hasn't known a razor in weeks, and his dark hair falls past his collar in a way that marks him as outside the boundaries of civilized society. 3 months ago, he buried his younger brother Tommy in an unmarked grave after a botched bank robbery went wrong, and the hole that loss carved in his heart still bleeds fresh every morning when he wakes expecting to hear Tommy's laugh around the dying campfire. He lives by his Colt 45 and his horse, a steel-gray Mustang he calls Storm, moving from one temporary hideout to another across the Badlands of Arizona territory. His wanted poster describes him as armed and extremely dangerous, which isn't entirely wrong, but it doesn't mention that he once spent his last silver dollar buying medicine for a Mexican family whose child was dying of fever, or that he's never killed a man who wasn't trying to kill him first. The law brands him an outlaw for the banks he's robbed and the trains he's stopped, but Jack knows the real crime was being born poor in a territory where rich men write the rules and poor men hang for breaking them. The ravine yawns 15 feet deep, its walls carved smooth by flash floods that tear through this country every summer when the monsoons come. October's sun beats down mercilessly despite the shortening days, and the girl below hasn't moved since he spotted her from the ridge. Her blonde hair catches the light like spun gold, and even from this distance he can see the rise and fall of her chest that means she's still breathing. The Apache brave lies face down beside her, an arrow through his back, probably from his own people when they discovered him trying to take a white captive instead of following war party orders. Jack's horse stamps nervously beneath him, sensing the approach of riders from the east. Sheriff Morrison's voice carries on the dry wind, calling orders to his deputies as they spread out across the territory in their relentless hunt. Morrison's been chasing Jack for 6 months now, ever since the robbery at Silver Creek that went wrong and left a bank guard dead. The sheriff doesn't know it was Tommy's gun that fired the fatal shot, doesn't know that Jack tried to stop it, doesn't care that the guard was reaching for his weapon when panic took hold. All Morrison knows is that his town's money was stolen, and a good man died, and he's sworn to see Jack Malone dance at the end of a rope before the year turns. The girl stirs slightly, her hand reaching toward the water that trickles between the rocks. She's maybe 19 or 20, with the kind of pale complexion that speaks of a life lived indoors, protected from the harsh realities of frontier existence. Her dress, though torn and dirty now, shows the quality stitching and fine fabric that marks her as someone's treasured daughter. Jack knows exactly whose daughter she is. He's seen Sarah Morrison from a distance during his scouting trips into Copper Ridge, watched her hang laundry behind the sheriff's house and tend the vegetable garden with the gentle care of someone who's never known real hardship. The sound of approaching horses grows closer. Morrison's posse numbers at least 8 men, all armed and angry after 3 days of fruitless searching. They'll be here within the hour, and if they find Jack Malone with the sheriff's unconscious daughter, no amount of explaining will save him from a lynching. The smart play, the survival play, is to ride north toward the Apache reservation and lose them in the maze of canyons that stretch toward Flagstaff. He has food for 3 days, ammunition for a dozen fights, and a horse fast enough to outrun anything in Morrison's stable. But the girl moans softly in her unconsciousness, and the sound carries up from the ravine like a prayer. Jack has heard that sound before, from Tommy as he lay dying in Jack's arms, blood bubbling from his lips as he whispered apologies for the choices that brought them both to ruin. Tommy was barely 18, still young enough to believe that one big score would set them free to start fresh in California or Oregon, somewhere the shadow of their father's reputation wouldn't follow. Jack promised his dying brother that he would make it right somehow, would find a way to honor the good man Tommy could have become if circumstances had been different. Jack dismounts and hobbles storm in the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree. The descent into the ravine requires careful handholds on the rock face, and loose stones skitter down ahead of him as he picks his way toward the bottom. The girl becomes more real with each foot he descends, the freckles scattered across her nose, the calluses on her palms that speak of work despite her privileged appearance, the way her fingers curve protectively around something clutched in her left hand. When he reaches her side, Jack can see she's been unconscious for hours. The cut on her forehead has stopped bleeding, but dried blood mats her hair and stains her dress. Her breathing comes shallow and quick, and her skin feels too warm when he checks her pulse. The Apache brave beside her wears the paint and dress of a young warrior, probably barely old enough to ride with war parties. A coup stick lies near his outstretched hand, its eagle feathers bright against the red dirt. Sarah Morrison opens her eyes as Jack lifts her head to check for serious injury, and the fear that floods her face tells him she recognizes him even through her pain and confusion. Her mouth opens to scream, but only a whisper emerges. Jack holds his finger to his lips and speaks softly, his voice carrying the gentle tone he once used to calm spooked horses on his father's ranch. "Easy now, miss. You're safe, the Apache's dead, and help is coming." He doesn't tell her that the help will probably hang him before asking questions. "Can you tell me your name?" "Sarah," she whispers, her voice dry as dust. "Sarah Morrison, my father, is looking for you," Jack finishes. "Half the territory's looking for you. How long have you been here?" She struggles to sit up, wincing as movement sends pain shooting through her head. "Since yesterday morning. I was riding to visit the Hendersons when the Apache found me. He killed my horse and dragged me here, but then his own people came and..." She gestures weakly toward the dead brave. "They argued about something. I couldn't understand their words, but they were angry. When they rode away, they left him here to guard me." Jack examines the ravine walls, noting the narrow path that leads up the eastern slope. The Apache chose this place well, hidden from casual view but with an escape route if needed. Unfortunately, that same escape route means Morrison's posse will eventually find them here. Jack estimates they have maybe 30 minutes before the first riders appear on the rim above. "Can you stand?" he asks, offering his hand. Sarah takes it tentatively, her fingers small and soft compared to his calloused palm. She struggles to her feet, but immediately sways, pressing her free hand to her forehead. "Everything's spinning," she admits. Jack steadies her with an arm around her waist, and notices she's still clutching something in her left hand. When she opens her fingers, a small silver locket gleams in the afternoon sun. Inside, he glimpses a miniature photograph of a young man in Confederate uniform. "Your husband?" he asks. "My brother," she says quietly. "He died at Gettysburg 3 years ago. I was going to leave this at his grave marker at the Henderson place. They knew him before the war." The humanity in her voice catches Jack off guard. He expected the sheriff's daughter to be spoiled and helpless, but there's steel beneath Sarah Morrison's genteel surface. She loved someone enough to risk a dangerous ride through Apache country just to honor his memory. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love, reminds Jack painfully of his own devotion to Tommy. "We need to get you out of here," Jack says. "Your father's close, and these canyons will be crawling with searchers soon." Sarah looks at him with sudden understanding. "You're Jack Malone," she says. "It's not a question." "Yes, ma'am, you're the one who's been robbing banks. The one my father's been hunting. Guilty as charged." Jack meets her gaze steadily, waiting for the renewed fear or disgust that usually accompanies recognition. Instead, Sarah studies his face with curious intensity. "Why are you helping me? You could have ridden past and been in Mexico by sunset." The question hangs between them like smoke, carrying weight Jack isn't prepared to examine too closely. "Because leaving you here would be the same as killing you myself," he says finally. "And I'm not that man, whatever people say." Movement on the rim above catches his eye, a rider silhouetted against the sky, scanning the terrain below. Jack pulls Sarah deeper into the shadow of an overhanging rock, just as Sheriff Morrison's voice echoes off the canyon walls. "Sarah, Sarah, honey, can you hear me?" Sarah starts toward the sound of her father's voice, but Jack's hand on her arm stops her. "Wait," he whispers urgently. "If they see me with you..." Understanding floods her eyes. Morrison's deputies won't ask questions if they find the notorious Jack Malone with the sheriff's kidnapped daughter. They'll shoot first and sort out the truth afterward, if at all. Sarah looks toward the rim where her father's voice continues calling her name, then back at Jack's face. "What do you want me to tell them?" she asks. The question surprises him. Most people in her situation would be screaming for rescue without thought for consequences. But Sarah Morrison seems to understand that Jack Malone's life hangs in the balance of her next words. "Tell them the truth," Jack says. "Tell them I saved you. And if they don't believe me," Jack manages a rueful smile, "then I reckon I'll find out how fast Storm can run with bullets whistling past my ears." Sarah nods slowly, decision crystallizing in her expression. She cups her hands around her mouth and calls up to the rim. "Papa, I'm here. I'm all right." The thunder of horses' hooves answers her call as Morrison's entire posse converges on the ravine. Jack steps back into the deepest shadow he can find, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. 8 armed men will be down here within minutes, and his choices have narrowed to surrender or fight. Neither option offers much hope for survival. Sheriff Morrison appears at the rim above, his weathered face creased with relief and desperation. At 55, he's a man carved from the same hard stone as the territory he protects, with steel-gray hair and eyes that have seen too much violence to trust easily. His voice carries the authority of 15 years wearing a badge, but Jack can hear the father's anguish beneath the lawman's control. "Sarah, are you hurt? Can you climb up?" "I'm hurt, Papa, but not badly. And Papa, Jack Malone is here. He saved me from the Apache." Silence stretches taut as a bowstring. Jack can practically hear Morrison's mind working through the implications, weighing his duty as a lawman against his gratitude as a father. When Morrison finally speaks, his voice carries deadly calm. "Malone, show yourself." Jack steps into view, hands raised but not surrendering, his gun still holstered but ready. Morrison aims a rifle down at him, and Jack can see other deputies taking positions along the rim. The smart thing would be to dive for cover and start shooting, but Sarah stands too close, and Jack won't risk hitting her in a gunfight. "Sheriff," Jack calls up, "your daughter's been through hell. She needs medical attention, not a shooting match. You'll forgive me if I don't take advice from a bank robber," Morrison replies, but his rifle doesn't waver. "Sarah, get away from him." Sarah steps protectively in front of Jack, her small frame a fragile shield against 8 rifles. "Papa, he saved my life. The Apache was holding me prisoner. Mr. Malone killed him and stayed to help me instead of running away." "Sarah, honey, sometimes outlaws do good things for bad reasons. Come away from him now. What bad reason could he have for saving me?" Sarah demands, her voice carrying surprising strength. "He could have been in Mexico by now. Instead, he's risking his life to make sure I get home safely." Jack watches the exchange with fascination. Sarah Morrison is protecting him, choosing to stand between him and her father's justice despite knowing exactly who he is and what he's done. The girl who looks so fragile lying unconscious among the rocks has revealed a core of steel that reminds Jack of the women who followed wagon trains west despite Apache raids and rattlesnake dangers. Deputy Williams, a young man with more enthusiasm than experience, calls down from the eastern rim, "Sheriff, we've got clear shots from here. Just give the word. Nobody shoots while my daughter's down there." Morrison snaps, "Sarah, I'm coming down. You move away from Malone right now." "No, Papa, not until you promise me you'll listen to what really happened here." Morrison's face cycles through emotions, relief, frustration, pride and fear warring for dominance. His daughter has never defied him before, but she's choosing this moment to find her voice. Jack can see the exact instant when the sheriff realizes his little girl has grown into a woman with her own moral compass. "All right," Morrison says finally. "I'll listen." But Malone keeps his hands where I can see them. The descent takes Morrison several minutes, his movements careful and deliberate, despite his obvious urgency to reach his daughter. When he finally stands on the ravine floor, rifle trained on Jack, but finger off the trigger, the family resemblance between father and daughter becomes unmistakable. They share the same stubborn chin and determined eyes, the same way of standing straight despite impossible circumstances. Sarah moves to her father's side, but doesn't step away from Jack. "Papa, look around. Really look. See the Apache brave. See where I was lying. See the blood on the rocks. Mr. Malone found me unconscious and stayed to help even though you and your deputies were closing in. He could have taken me hostage or just left me here to die. Instead, he made sure I was safe." Morrison examines the scene with a lawman's trained eye, taking in the position of the body, the signs of struggle, the evidence of Sarah's ordeal. His expression gradually shifts from suspicion to grudging acknowledgement. When he looks back at Jack, something has changed in his eyes. "Why?" Morrison asks simply. "Why save her when you knew it meant capture?" Jack considers several answers: duty, morality, the memory of his dead brother, but settles on the simplest truth, because she's somebody's daughter. Because leaving her here would have been wrong, and I've done enough wrong things for one lifetime. You killed a man in Silver Creek, Morrison says. Tom Reynolds. He had 3 children. That was my brother's gun, not mine, Jack replies quietly. Tommy panicked when Reynolds went for his weapon. I tried to stop it, but I was too late. Tommy died 3 months later, and that weighing on his conscience helped kill him. Some crimes follow you into the grave, Sheriff. Morrison studies Jack's face for long moments, searching for deception and finding only weary honesty. Even if that's true, you still robbed the bank. You still broke the law. Yes, sir, I did, and I expect I'll pay for it. But not today. Today I helped bring your daughter home safe, and that has to count for something. Sarah looks between the 2 men, sensing the delicate balance of justice and mercy that hangs in the desert air between them. Her father has spent 6 months hunting Jack Malone, but Jack Malone just saved his daughter's life. The law demands one response, but gratitude suggests another. Papa, Sarah says softly, remember what you always told me about mercy being justice tempered with wisdom. Morrison's jaw works silently as he wrestles with competing loyalties. Above them, his deputies wait for orders, their rifles still trained on Jack. The afternoon sun slants lower, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote calls to its pack, the sound lonely and wild. Jack Malone, Morrison says finally, you're under arrest for bank robbery and accessory to murder, but I'm willing to escort you to trial in Tucson instead of letting my boys settle this here and now. Sarah's word carries weight with me, and she says you acted with honor today. Jack nods acceptance. A trial in Tucson means lawyers and judges instead of bullets and nooses. It's more hope than he expected to have after 3 years running. I appreciate that, Sheriff. And I'm glad Sarah's safe. We'll get her back to town first, Morrison continues. Doc Patterson needs to look at that head wound. Then we'll discuss terms for your surrender. Sarah moves closer to Jack, surprising both men. Mr. Malone, thank you. I won't forget what you did today. She extends her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Jack takes it. Her grip is firm despite her small size, and her eyes hold steady on his face. Something passes between them in that handshake. Recognition, gratitude, the beginning of understanding that transcends the boundaries of law and outlaw. It was my honor, Miss Morrison, Jack says, and means it. The journey back to Copper Ridge takes 2 hours, with Sarah riding double behind Deputy Collins while Jack rides Storm under heavy guard. Morrison sets a careful pace to avoid jarring his injured daughter, and the posse maintains professional discipline despite their obvious desire to see the notorious outlaw finally captured. Jack uses the time to study the landscape he spent 3 years hiding in, wondering if he'll ever see these canyons and mesas again as a free man. Copper Ridge sits in a natural bowl surrounded by red rock cliffs, its buildings clustered around a single main street like wagons circled against attack. The town's population hovers near 300 souls, mostly miners and ranchers with their families, plus the shopkeepers and professionals needed to maintain frontier civilization. News of Sarah's rescue spreads quickly, and by the time the posse reaches the sheriff's office, half the town has gathered to witness Jack Malone's capture. Dr. Patterson, a small man with gentle hands and worried eyes, takes charge of Sarah immediately. Head injuries are nothing to fool with, he tells Morrison. I need to examine her properly and keep her under observation tonight. Jack dismounts under the watchful eyes of 4 deputies, his wrists bound with Morrison's personal handcuffs. The crowd murmurs restlessly, some calling for immediate justice while others express curiosity about the outlaw who saved their sheriff's daughter. Jack recognizes the volatile mood of frontier justice, where gratitude and vengeance often war for supremacy in the same hearts. Margaret Morrison appears in the doorway of the doctor's office, her face pale with 3 days of worry. She's a small woman like her daughter, but with the steel core that frontier life demands from wives and mothers. When she sees Sarah safe in Dr. Patterson's care, tears flow freely down her cheeks. Thank God, she whispers, clutching Sarah's hand. When you didn't come home yesterday, when we found your horse dead and those Apache tracks, I'm all right, Mama, Sarah says softly. Mr. Malone saved me. If he hadn't come along when he did. Margaret Morrison looks through the doorway at Jack, standing chained between 2 deputies. Gratitude and confusion war in her expression. Like any frontier woman, she's heard stories about Jack Malone, some calling him a cold-blooded killer, others insisting he only robs from banks and railroad companies that cheat honest folks. Now this notorious outlaw has saved her daughter's life, and she doesn't know how to reconcile the stories with the reality. "Thank you," she says simply, the words carrying more weight than any formal speech. Jack touches his hat brim respectfully. "Ma'am." Morrison guides Jack toward the jail behind the sheriff's office, a solid stone building designed to hold everything from drunk cowboys to Apache warriors. The cell is clean but Spartan. Iron bars, a narrow cot, a wash basin, and a small window facing east toward the sunrise. Jack has been in worse accommodations, but the finality of iron doors closing behind him brings home the reality of his situation. "I'll bring food later," Morrison says, hanging the keys on a peg near his desk. "And tomorrow we'll discuss the arrangements for your transport to Tucson." "Sheriff," Jack says as Morrison turns to leave, "your daughter's got more courage than most men I've known. You should be proud." Morrison pauses in the doorway. "I am proud. And I'm grateful. But that doesn't change what you are or what you've done." "No, sir, it doesn't. But maybe it changes what happens next." The sheriff studies Jack's face through the bars. "Maybe it does. We'll see." Night falls over Copper Ridge with the sudden finality of desert darkness. Jack lies on the narrow cot, hands behind his head, staring through the small window at stars that look different from behind bars than they did from open country. Somewhere in town, Sarah Morrison sleeps in her own bed for the first time in 3 days, safe under her parents' roof. The knowledge brings Jack more satisfaction than he expected. Around midnight, footsteps approach the jail. Jack sits up, expecting Morrison or one of his deputies, but Sarah's voice whispers through the darkness. "Mr. Malone, are you awake?" Jack moves to the window, surprised to see Sarah standing in the alley behind the jail. She's changed into a simple brown dress and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the desert chill. The bandage on her forehead shows white in the moonlight. "Miss Morrison, you shouldn't be here. If your father finds out." "I had to come," she says. "I keep thinking about what you said, about your brother and the bank robbery going wrong. Papa told me about Tom Reynolds and his children. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for theirs." Jack grips the iron bars, moved by her compassion. "Tom Reynolds was a good man protecting other people's money. My brother was scared and young, and made a terrible mistake. Both families paid the price for choices that happened too fast to take back. Is that why you stayed? Why you saved me instead of running? Because you're trying to make up for what happened in Silver Creek?" The question strikes deeper than Jack expected. He's been running from the law for 6 months, but he's been running from guilt for much longer. Tommy's death didn't erase the weight of Tom Reynolds' murder. It only added the burden of a second life lost to bad choices and worse timing. "Maybe," Jack admits. "Or maybe I just couldn't ride past someone who needed help. I don't know anymore. 3 years ago, I was planning to buy a ranch in Colorado and raise horses. Now I'm sitting in jail waiting for a trial that'll probably end with a rope. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the man I wanted to be." Sarah moves closer to the window, her face illuminated by starlight. "People change, Mr. Malone. Sometimes they fall from grace, and sometimes they climb back up. The man who saved me today, that's who you really are, underneath all the running and hiding. You don't know me, Miss Morrison. You don't know the things I've done. I know you had a choice today between freedom and doing what was right. I know you chose to help someone who couldn't help herself. I know you're sitting in jail right now because you couldn't live with leaving me to die in that ravine. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Jack stares at her through the bars, seeing something in her eyes that he hasn't seen in a long time: belief in his fundamental humanity. For 3 years he's been defined by his crimes, his mistakes, his failures. Sarah Morrison looks at him and sees the man he used to be, the man he might still become. "Why does it matter to you?" he asks quietly. "Tomorrow your father's taking me to Tucson to stand trial. Best case, I spend 20 years in territorial prison. Worst case, I hang. Either way, you'll never see me again." Sarah's hands close around the iron bars, her fingers brushing his. "It matters because I don't believe in throwing people away. My brother died believing the South was fighting for something noble, even though slavery was wrong. He was a good man caught up in a terrible cause, just like you're a good man caught up in terrible circumstances. The world has enough hate and judgment. Maybe it's time for a little mercy." The touch of her fingers against his sends electricity through Jack's entire body. This woman, This sheriff's daughter, who should see him as the enemy, is offering him something more precious than freedom. She's offering him redemption, the possibility that his story might not end with a hangman's noose. "Sarah," he says softly, using her first name for the first time, "what are you really saying?" "I'm saying that maybe there's another way. Maybe mercy and justice don't have to be enemies. Maybe a man who saves someone's life deserves a chance to save his own." Before Jack can respond, footsteps echo from the front of the building. Sarah steps back from the window, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders. "I have to go," she whispers. "But Mr. Malone, Jack, think about what I said. Think about who you want to be when this is over." She disappears into the shadows, leaving Jack alone with thoughts more dangerous than any outlaw's bullet. For the first time in 3 years, he allows himself to imagine a future beyond running and hiding. The possibility seems as distant as the stars beyond his window, but Sarah Morrison has planted a seed of hope in the wasteland of his heart. Morning brings the sound of hammering from the town square. Jack looks through his cell window to see men constructing a platform, not a gallows but a speaker's stand for some kind of public gathering. Deputy Collins arrives with breakfast and coffee, his manner respectful rather than hostile. "Sheriff's called a town meeting for this afternoon," Collins explains. "Folks want to hear about what happened with the Apache and your capture. Sarah's going to speak to them about what you did." "She doesn't need to do that," Jack says. "I knew the consequences when I decided to help her." "Maybe so, but she feels differently. And between you and me, Malone, this town's been split on you for months. Some folks remember the banks you robbed were owned by Eastern investors who've been cheating local miners and ranchers. Others just see a outlaw who needs hanging. Sarah's testimony might tip the scales toward mercy." Jack drinks the coffee slowly, tasting freedom in every bitter sip. Outside his window, Copper Ridge prepares for a reckoning that will determine not just his fate, but the soul of the community itself. The choice between justice and mercy, between law and compassion, will be made by ordinary people struggling to do right in an unforgiving land. Sheriff Morrison appears at the cell door around noon, carrying Jack's gun belt and a basin of warm water. "Thought you might want to clean up before the meeting," he says, unlocking the cell. "I'm not putting you in chains for this, Malone, but don't mistake my gratitude for stupidity. Try to run, and my deputies will shoot you down." Jack washes the dust from his face and combs his hair with his fingers, transforming himself from desperate outlaw to something resembling a civilized man. Morrison hands him his gun belt, empty of ammunition but symbolically important. "Why?" Jack asks. "Because Sarah asked me to. She says a man should face his judgment with dignity, and dignity includes the right to wear his own weapons, even if they're empty." They walk together toward the town square, an unlikely pair, the sheriff and the outlaw, both changed by the events of the past day. Jack can see faces watching from windows and doorways, some curious, some hostile, some surprisingly sympathetic. Word of his rescue of Sarah Morrison has spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire, complicating the simple narrative of lawman versus criminal. The crowd gathered around the speaker's platform numbers close to 200 people, nearly the entire population of Copper Ridge and the surrounding ranches. Jack recognizes faces from wanted posters in his memory, knows that some of these same people would have shot him on sight just yesterday. Now they study him with new eyes, trying to reconcile the notorious outlaw with the man who saved their sheriff's daughter. Reverend Mitchell, a tall man with kind eyes and weathered hands, opens the meeting with a prayer for wisdom and justice. Judge Harrison, who rides circuit between territorial towns, sits at a small table with law books and papers, prepared to render legal opinion on whatever the community decides. Morrison addresses the crowd first, his voice carrying the authority of his badge and the weight of personal experience. "Friends, we're here to decide what justice looks like when the lines between right and wrong aren't as clear as we'd like them to be. Jack Malone is guilty of bank robbery and accessory to murder. Those are facts, and facts don't change because we're grateful for what he did yesterday." Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Some voices call for hanging, others for mercy. Morrison raises his hand for silence. "But facts aren't the whole truth," he continues. "The whole truth includes the man who saved my daughter's life when he could have saved his own skin instead. The whole truth includes the choice he made to stay and help instead of running for Mexico. That has to count for something in how we measure justice." Sarah steps onto the platform, her small figure somehow commanding the attention of the entire crowd. The bandage on her forehead reminds everyone of her ordeal, but her voice carries steady strength as she begins to speak. 3 days ago I left this town to visit friends and honor my brother's memory. I was captured by an Apache warrior who intended to trade me for weapons or horses. I spent a night and a day believing I would never see my family again, never see my home, never have the chance to live the life I'd planned. Her eyes find Jack in the crowd, and something passes between them that makes several onlookers exchange knowing glances. Jack Malone found me unconscious and helpless in Devil's Canyon. He had every reason to ride past. He was being hunted by my father and every deputy in the territory. Helping me meant capture and probable death. But he climbed down into that ravine anyway, and he stayed with me until help arrived. Sarah's voice grows stronger as she continues. I've heard the stories about Jack Malone. I know he's robbed banks and broken laws, but I also know that the man who saved me is capable of mercy, sacrifice, and honor. I know that he chose to do right even when it cost him everything. If we can't find room for mercy in our justice, then what kind of people are we? The crowd stirs restlessly. Jack can see the conflict in their faces, the desire for law and order warring with admiration for his sacrifice. In a territory where courage and honor matter more than legal niceties, his actions carry weight that transcends his crimes. Judge Harrison rises from his table, his black robes lending gravity to his words. The law is clear about Mr. Malone's crimes. Bank robbery carries a sentence of 10 to 20 years in territorial prison. Accessory to murder carries the possibility of hanging. However, the law also recognizes mitigating circumstances, actions that demonstrate character and deserve consideration in sentencing. He pauses, surveying the crowd with eyes that have seen 30 years of frontier justice. What happened in Devil's Canyon was heroic by any measure. Mr. Malone chose honor over freedom, mercy over self-preservation. While this doesn't erase his crimes, it does speak to the content of his character. I'm prepared to recommend a reduced sentence if this community believes mercy is warranted. The debate that follows lasts 2 hours. Voices rise in passion on both sides, some demanding full justice for Tom Reynolds' death, others arguing that Jack's heroism has earned him a second chance. Through it all, Jack stands silently, letting others decide his fate. The irony isn't lost on him that the community he's spent 3 years hiding from now holds his life in their collective hands. Finally, Morrison calls for a vote. All in favor of recommending mercy, a reduced sentence that acknowledges both Mr. Malone's crimes and his heroism. Hands rise slowly throughout the crowd. Jack counts them with growing amazement. Farmers and shopkeepers, miners and ranchers, women and children all voting to spare his life. When Morrison tallies the count, mercy wins by a margin of nearly 2 to 1. The decision of this community, Judge Harrison announces, is that Jack Malone should serve 5 years in territorial prison for bank robbery, with the murder charge dropped in recognition of his heroic actions. Furthermore, we recommend that he be considered for early parole based on good behavior and community service. The crowd disperses slowly, people stopping to shake Jack's hand or offer words of encouragement. Several ranchers mention they could use help when he's released, suggesting that Jack Malone might have a future in Copper Ridge after all. The possibility of redemption, so distant just hours ago, suddenly seems within reach. Sarah approaches as the last townspeople drift away, her parents close behind her. Margaret Morrison surprises Jack by embracing him briefly, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for bringing our daughter home," she whispers. "We'll never forget what you did." Morrison extends his hand, and Jack takes it gratefully. 5 years isn't freedom, the sheriff says, but it's not a rope either. You've got a chance to make something different of your life, Malone. Don't waste it. I don't intend to, Sheriff. And I want you to know when I get out, if you'll have me, I'd like to come back here. This feels like home in a way nowhere has for a long time. Sarah steps closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. 5 years isn't forever, Jack. And mercy isn't a one-time gift. It's something we choose every day. When you come back, we'll be here. The promise in her voice carries more weight than any legal judgment. Jack realizes that somewhere in the past day, Sarah Morrison has become more than the sheriff's daughter he saved. She's become a reason to hope, a future worth working toward, a chance at love he never expected to find. "Sarah," he says quietly, aware that her parents are listening, "when I come back, I want to come back as a man worthy of whatever future we might build together. Will you wait for me?" "I'll wait," she says simply. Love doesn't measure time in years, it measures it in faithfulness, and I have faith in the man you're going to become. The wagon ride to Tucson begins at dawn, with Jack riding in chains but not in despair. Through the small window in the transport wagon, he watches the familiar landscape of Devil's Canyon fade into the distance. The place where his old life ended, and his new one began, disappears behind red rock cliffs, but the memory burns bright in his heart. 5 years. 5 years to prove that Jack Malone can be more than his worst moments, more than his greatest failures. 5 years to transform himself from outlaw to citizen, from runner to builder, from a man defined by his crimes to one defined by his choices. Sarah Morrison will be 25 when he returns, still young enough to build a life together, old enough to know her own heart. The territorial prison in Tucson rises from the desert like a monument to human folly, its walls designed to hold the worst men the frontier can produce. But Jack Malone enters those gates with something most prisoners lack: hope. He carries Sarah's promise like a talisman, her faith in his redemption more powerful than any charm or prayer. Time moves differently in prison, measured not in days or weeks but in small victories and gradual transformation. Jack learns to read and write properly, studies law books provided by sympathetic guards, and helps establish educational programs for younger inmates. He breaks up fights instead of starting them, offers guidance to men struggling with their own demons, and slowly builds a reputation as someone worth listening to. Letters arrive regularly from Copper Ridge. Sarah writes about the changing seasons, the growth of the town, the small dramas and large joys that make up frontier life. Her words paint pictures of a world waiting for his return, a community that hasn't forgotten the outlaw who chose mercy over freedom. Morrison's occasional notes are brief but encouraging, reporting that Sarah remains unmarried despite several suitors and that his ranch could use a good foreman when Jack completes his sentence. The years pass. Jack's hair shows gray at the temples, and his hands grow soft from indoor work, but his resolve never wavers. He saves every letter from Sarah, reads them until the paper grows soft from handling, and plans the life they'll build together when freedom comes. The outlaw who rode into Devil's Canyon 5 years ago no longer exists. In his place stands a man tempered by suffering and refined by hope. Release day arrives with autumn colors painting the Tucson sky. Jack walks through the prison gates, carrying a small bundle of possessions and a heart full of dreams. The stagecoach to Copper Ridge won't leave until morning, so he spends the night in a small hotel, staring out the window at stars that look different now that they shine on a free man. The journey home takes 2 days, each mile bringing him closer to Sarah and the future they've planned through 5 years of letters. Jack has changed in prison, grown older, wiser, steadier, but he wonders how much Sarah has changed. Will the woman who waited for him be the same girl who offered mercy to a desperate outlaw? Will 5 years of separation have dimmed the spark that ignited between them in the moments after her rescue? Copper Ridge appears in the distance, grown larger and more prosperous than the town Jack left behind. New buildings line the main street, and the population has clearly doubled. Progress has come to the frontier, bringing civilization to places that once knew only survival. Jack wonders if there's still room in this new world for a man with his history. The stagecoach stops in front of the general store, and Jack steps down with legs unsteady from travel and emotion. The few townspeople visible on the street stop and stare, recognition dawning slowly. Some faces show welcome, others uncertainty. 5 years is long enough for wounds to heal, but not long enough for memories to fade completely. Sheriff Morrison emerges from his office, older and grayer but still carrying himself with quiet authority. He approaches Jack with measured steps, his expression unreadable until he extends his hand in greeting. "Welcome home, Jack," he says simply. The words hit Jack like physical blows. Home. After years of running, hiding and imprisonment, someone is calling Copper Ridge his home. The emotion threatens to overwhelm him until a familiar voice calls his name from across the street. Sarah Morrison, now 25 and more beautiful than memory could capture, stands in the doorway of the schoolhouse, her face radiant with joy and relief. She wears a simple blue dress that matches her eyes, and her blonde hair catches the afternoon sunlight like spun gold. 5 years have transformed the sheriff's daughter into a woman of grace and strength, but her smile is exactly as Jack remembered. She runs to him across the dusty street, her skirts lifting in the wind, and Jack opens his arms to catch her. When she reaches him, they hold each other with 5 years of longing and hope made real. The townspeople who have gathered to witness his return fade into background noise as Jack and Sarah rediscover the connection that sustained them through separation and suffering. "You came back," Sarah whispers against his chest. "I promised I would," Jack replies, his voice rough with emotion. "Some promises are worth keeping no matter what they cost. And some men are worth waiting for," Sarah says, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Welcome home, Jack Malone." The love that began in a canyon, filled with danger, has survived 5 years of separation and grown stronger in the soil of sacrifice. Jack Malone, the outlaw, is dead, buried in a territorial prison cell. In his place stands Jack Malone, the redeemed, a man worthy of love, capable of mercy, ready to build instead of destroy. The choice between love and freedom that once seemed impossible has revealed itself as no choice at all. True freedom comes not from running away, but from running towards something worth the risk. And love, real love, doesn't demand perfection. It demands only the courage to change, the wisdom to grow, and the faith to believe that redemption is always possible for those willing to reach for it. The sun sets over Copper Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in those red rock canyons, the wind whispers stories of second chances and the power of mercy to transform even the hardest hearts. Jack Malone has found his way home at last, not to a place but to a person, not to freedom but to love, not to the man he was but to the man he's chosen to become. And in this place where the frontier meets civilization, where law meets mercy, where love conquers fear, a new story begins, not of an outlaw's fall but of a good man's rise, not of justice denied, but of grace triumphant. Not of love lost but of love that endures all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and never fails. The choice between love and freedom proved to be no choice at all. Love is freedom. Freedom to become who we're meant to be, freedom to forgive and be forgiven, freedom to hope beyond our failures and reach beyond our fears. And in the end, that's the only freedom worth having, the only love worth choosing, the only story worth telling. This tale of redemption echoes across the desert wind, carrying hope to all who struggle with their past and dream of a better future. It reminds us that mercy is always possible, that love can conquer even the deepest wounds, and that every sunset promises a new dawn for those brave enough to believe in second chances. In a world quick to judge and slow to forgive, stories like this one light candles against the darkness, showing us the way home to love, grace, and the endless possibility of human transformation.